Hi guys, Jack here, AG Pearce, just with another crop update. I'm here in a field close to Downham Market in Norfolk that we drilled at the back end of March this year. These carrots were open ground carrots, so these, unlike in some of the videos that I had in previous weeks, these weren't covered in polythene. And I just thought I'd give a bit of an update in terms of where we're going next in terms of fields and how crop quality looks moving forward. Obviously, as we transition away from carrots grown under polythene into carrots that weren't. The majority of this field is a variety called Nazareth. I've just dug a sample, so we'll have a look at that. So I've just pulled these out. This has been pulled out in the part of the field that has been irrigated, and the reason why I did that is I just want to show you the soil. So the ground we're on at this part of the field is very stony. It's just we're just at the edge of the field, and it's where the stone separators basically drop a lot of the stones that we take out of the ground when we separate. But you can see obviously the ground that's dry is still fairly sandy soil, but it has got a bit of body to it. So when we look at the mud the soil that's been irrigated, I get told off for calling it mud. It's not mud, it's soil. It has got a bit of body to it, and that's actually quite good because it retains moisture quite well. These carrots have actually caught up our early poly crop. So one of the challenges of growing crops under polythene is that you are actually preventing sometimes the ability to irrigate. You're also increasing weed pressure, and also you're increasing the likelihood of stress affecting the growth of the carrots. Whereas where you're growing in a field without polythene and you're letting the carrots grow more naturally, you're able to get on earlier and better. You're more effective with your herbicides and your pesticides, and you're able to get water on far easier than if you are to irrigate a field with polythene on it, because as you can imagine, most of the water ends up in the wheelings as opposed to actually on the beds and in the carrots. So because we had such a dry, hot start and fairly poor spring, the poly carrots probably didn't respond quite as well as they should have. And then as we've got some slightly better conditions now, these open ground carrots that were drilled slightly later have actually overtaken them because they've actually been able to take up more of the inputs earlier on in the year when we were giving it to them. Also, sometimes when you're growing carrots on the poly, because they're growing really quickly, they don't respond quite as well to better conditions later on in their growth. Their growth cycle is slightly shorter because you're forcing them to grow quicker, so that even if they're presented with some really good conditions, they don't naturally grow on quite as well. And you can see in the field here, we've got really good vibrant tops with really good vigor, and that's a great sign that the crop is still growing and the roots underneath are putting on good size. You can see size wise it is a bit variable in this field, and the sample that I've sort of dug, carrots are a little bit short. We're not seeing this across most of the field. We're seeing carrots more of this length, and I think I've said in previous videos, length is really important for yield, as is crown diameter for processing, because we're obviously trying to produce different shapes out of the carrots that we produce. So the larger the carrot we get, typically the better cut definition on dices or for battens. You need that larger size of carrot, so we will always grow for a larger crop. But on the whole, these look good. There's very low signs of disease pressure. There's no cavity, nothing sort of showing in terms of virus or any other sort of things that we would really look out for this time of year, so we're fairly happy. So we're a couple of miles away from the field that we were last in. There's been a 4-day gap in between filming this. I've tried to wear the same t-shirt for continuity purposes, but as you can see, the weather is slightly different. It's quite windy today, so I'm hiding behind some trees, just so that you don't get loads of wind interference. And also, it's rained a lot since over the weekend since I filmed that first field. So as you can see, we've got no irrigators running in the background. So it's Wednesday today. I filmed that last piece on Thursday, and we've had 2 or 3 days of fairly good rainfall, which is just what the crop needs, really. Broken sunshine, fairly warm temperatures. It's still relatively cold in the evenings at the moment, which is unseasonable. but on the whole it's fairly good. This field here behind me is quite a large field. It's 22 acres. It's called Rockcliffe 14, which isn't the most exciting field name that we have, but it serves a purpose. So the variety in here is Nazareth. These carrots were drilled March time. They were drilled like the last field, open ground, so they weren't covered in polythene. So in terms of things we're doing differently to a standard grower, I mentioned earlier in the video that one of the things that we really do want is a really bold crop, a large crop. So what we do is we actually drill on a lower seed density to a lot of other growers. And when I mean seed density, essentially all we're doing is putting less seeds in the ground per square metre, let's say, than you would if you were probably growing a pre-packed crop. Now, a bit like goldfish, if you give the carrots room to grow, they'll grow into that space. If you have high populations of seed, with any crops, you'll probably end up with a smaller crop. Lower populations, the crop will have more space to grow. Now, you'll see this actually not in this field. I've taken some video of another field because it's easier to see because there isn't quite as much growth. It's a later drilling. And you can see that there's quite significant gaps between each of the carrots, and what that does is allow the carrots to grow into a larger size, which is perfect for what we need for processing. So let's go and have a look at the sample now. You can see size wise we're not seeing anything huge in the part of the field that I've dug. So one of the things we do have to bear in mind, this is a 22 acre field, it's quite large, so the crop will differ all the way through the field depending on how the topography of the field changes. So some parts of the field are heavier parts that basically mean that they retain more moisture, so we tend to see more larger carrots because they don't dry out as quick. So one of the important things that we do before we move into any field is do multiple digs across the field, because what we'll find is, like the part that I've dug here, really good looking roots. You know, there's no signs of cavity or any defects from a skin point of view, but they are slightly short. We'd prefer sort of a minimum root length of around this carrot, and you can see there's down this end, it's quite a lot of smaller carrots, which obviously don't give us much yield, and small carrots like this will probably just fall through the webbing of the harvester because they're not particularly useful. We're not also seeing any 40 plus for battens in this sample, but I know from the digs that we've done, we're actually seeing sort of 10 to 15% at the moment in this field. So it's not by any means a disaster, but it's just Barry, our head of operations and produce, he's out in the fields every day looking at samples, looking at digs, and sometimes when we're harvesting a field, we may have to go into multiple parts of it to get the right size of carrot for the factory. So as we're moving through this part of the field where we've got smaller carrots, we might actually have to harvest a couple of loads from another part of the field where there's some bigger carrots, which again, it's not something that typically you'd have to do for pre-pack, but for us, for processing, you know, because size is important and it very much defines what we do have to sort of go through these multiple steps to make sure that we're feeding our factory with the right material, and we're always driven by what nature gives us. You know, we're not producing plastic bags or plastic toys where we can just put something in a mold and get something consistent each time. You know, it's so driven by weather, soil type, and there's a lot of variables that even with the best assessments done at the start of the year by agronomists and when we're looking at selecting lands, there's still things that catch us out and things that sometimes we can't explain. And as a processor and as a processing business, we've got to just try and get as much information as we possibly can all the time to drive what we do in terms of our production. And this applies to all the produce that we supply. So it's not just carrots. Obviously these videos recently have been quite focused on carrots. I will be doing a video in the next couple of weeks on onions. And onions are very much the same, and actually size really drives not so much product quality for you as the customer, but for us as efficiency and processing efficiency and cost. Size and shape makes a massive difference. So that's something that we'll talk about in coming weeks. And again, it's no different to sweet potato and butternut squash, peppers, courgettes, a lot of the other products that we supply. We're always having to work around the natural shape and variability in a crop. The Last field that I thought I'd show you today is something that was drilled later. So far we've looked at sort of what we call early carrots, so whether they were drilled under polythene, covered with polythene, or they were left to grow sort of open grounds. They were all drilled sort of from February all the way through to the end of March. The field I'm in is a slightly different geographical area as well. So we're actually just north of Kings Lynn. Sandringham is actually just a couple of miles that way. So we're north of Kings Lynn and probably 10 miles away from our sort of main base at Wormegee. So the field I'm in now, these carrots were actually drilled at the 1st of June or very early in June, so a really different drilling window, but these carrots are not destined for harvest in the next couple of months. These will probably be harvested November, maybe December time, but probably most likely November. So these carrots have still got plenty of time to grow. Because we don't need these until later, we won't drill them earlier. They've got plenty of time to grow, but I just thought I'd show you now how much different they look in terms of. Just pulled a really small sample of these for us to look at. The first thing you'll notice compared to what we've been looking at is size. Obviously there's still some really immature carrots in there, which is sort of perfectly normal for what we would expect, given these were only drilled in June and we're now just at the end of August. So they've only been growing a few months. But as you can see, they've put on quite a lot of size, and something that's really positive is the length. You can see the carrots have been growing down. So we've already established good length. So now we just need the carrots to bulk out a little bit more and continue to grow. So as I said, they've got plenty of time to grow. They've got perfect conditions at the moment. So we're hoping for sort of a good crop. Sort of as a general outlook, over the next couple of months and the season, obviously carrots are still growing, as you can see from the carrots in the sample of this field. Crops are still growing, so they still can be affected by weather events over the next couple of months, but you know, the risk of drought as we move out of the summer and risk of extreme temperatures obviously is greatly diminished. So we're hoping, you know, to have a fairly good run into December, and once we get to sort of December time, late November, the carrots senesce, which is basically a term for them sort of going dormant. The carrots, they'll sit in the field and we'll store them in the field. Some fields will obviously cover with straw, and I will come on to that in a later video, but we'll cover them in polythene and straw. The majority of what we do in terms of strawed carrot is actually up in Scotland, which again will feature in a video later this year when we go up there, up in Angus. But generally we're not looking at a stellar year. Obviously we've got some really good growing conditions at the moment, but we also had some really poor growing conditions earlier on in the year. So when you look at it as a balance, it's very much average at best. But compared to sort of last season and some of the other conditions we've had over the last couple of years, you know, we're fairly happy with this. Obviously size is probably going to be the biggest challenge. Obviously in the earlier crops that we've been harvesting at the moment, it's really variable, but hopefully as we move into some of these later drilled crops and we sort of get into the main part of the season, as we call it, hopefully we'll start to see some consistency. So that's all from me. As ever, if you've got any questions, please give me a shout. My email will be on the video after this, and have a great day and a great week. Thank you.